All right, we are live. Hello there. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ian Minerve, and this is Minerve's on the Move. Here, me and my family of five show and discuss life living abroad, especially as a Black family from the United States. Now, remember, this is live, so please go ahead and type your comments in below as me and our special guest today have a dialogue about what are third culture kids. So today I am happy to introduce our guest for today. His name is Rainier Lee, the one and only. He is a father and educator who is and also an expert on third culture kids. Welcome, Rainier.
Thanks. Well, hi guys. My name, as Ian said, is Rainier. I actually work in elementary currently with Ian in Honduras, so that's kind of where this connection came to. That a little bit about myself is I'm originally from the United States. However, I hold citizenship in both the United States and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. My mom is Dutch, which means I got the passport. I have family coming from all over the world. My grandparents come from, I think, 3 or 4 different countries. So I have that kind of multicultural background. Yeah, but I'm excited to be on this podcast, answer some questions, and kind of join the conversation about what it's like being an expat. I'm not of Black descent, but I kind of tell Ian, like, I'm a latte. If he's a mocha, I'm a latte.
Exactly.
So, but I do know like a little bit of what it's like to be like a person of color abroad, of mixed race. So yeah, excited about today.
Beautiful, man. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been wanting to do this for a while. So I'll go ahead, dive right in with one of our first questions. Because for those who don't know, Rainier, I know you are one of my go-to people to explain what exactly is a third culture kid.
Yeah. So basically, a third culture kid, this is coming from a terminology that came from a sociologist, Ruth something. I can't remember her last name, but she basically termed these children third culture kids because they didn't grow up in either their father's culture or their mother's culture.
Gotcha.
Their culture of their nationality. So, for example, this might be a student who grows up in an international school. Let's say Ian, your kids, for example. Let's take one of them, the younger ones. They're born in America. Their parents are from the United States. You're from the islands.
Yeah.
But they're raised in Honduras or like Lord knows where else. Like, so they have that third culture where they are. They're not Honduran. They're not Latino, but they're raised in that culture where both of their parents' cultures are separated from their actual, I guess, upbringing. So that's kind of what a third culture kid is.
Gotcha. Yeah, you brought up a good point that I might have dabbled on a little bit on our channel. As you beautifully said, I'm actually a firstborn in my family, born in the United States. However, my father and my mother are from the islands of Trinidad and Tobago. 2 islands, 1 country, I always tell people. So it has been interesting because we're both fathers now.
Yeah.
Raising children outside of our country of origin.
Yeah, that is an interesting actually thing you bring up. I had my daughter, she was born last December. So here we go.
Yes.
She was born in Honduras, San Pedro Sula, but my wife's not from here. I'm not from here. She has 3 passports. She automatically gets a Honduran passport, a US passport from her mom, a Dutch passport from her dad. So as we're kind of living this international school life,
yeah,
it's made me more curious of like, what is it like to raise a third culture, and made me reflect on myself too, because I come from all over the place as well. Yes. And how to navigate that to where, okay, maybe she's going to be the only white, like European looking student if we live in Asia in her classroom, or maybe your kids might be the only like Afro-Latino looking children in their classroom or something. There's those conversations that we kind of have to have with our kids on what is identity, what is belonging, and basically what is culture. Because the students, our kids are going to ask those questions. I know Aurora is going to ask them. I'm sure Natalie or Omari or even Monty have asked that already. Like, why don't I look like the other students? You know, especially in younger kids. Why don't I look like them? Why don't I speak their language? So that's kind of what has prompted me to dig deeper. My background before education, I was a cultural anthropologist. So just naturally, I'm asking those questions as it is. But having a kid made me kind of like shift my focus to what is a third culture kid and how do I raise them to like find identity and meaning. So yeah.
I love all of that, and I loved how you mentioned 2 points I want to reflect on. You said you're a cultural anthropologist, and I also wanted to just know personally, just what do you identify with culturally? Like when people say, "Hey, what are you?" Because I'll be honest, I'll look at you when I first met you, I was like, I have no idea what he is, but it's all.
Well, in my mother's words, I am God knows what.
Wise mother.
No, but to answer your first question, Ian, anthropology is basically the study of different people. So there are different branches in the United States. You go to archaeology, cultural anthropology, linguistics, physical anthropology, where it's like the Bones TV show. That's also anthropology.
Yeah.
My shift is to cultural anthropology. So I'm interested in people's oral stories, people's kind of migration patterns, people's languages, different things like that. That's what made me want to become a international school teacher, because I realized, wow, academics don't get paid money. So
Yeah.
might as well go abroad, get paid for it, and live the anthropology life kind of comfortably. So that's what an anthropologist is. You kind of study different cultures, languages, people, histories as well. I always try to tell people historians study the history from the past. Anthropologists study history in the making in the present. So if that gives you kind of context for what it is. Now, the second question, God knows what my culture is. I'll start with my parents. My mother is from the Netherlands, but her parents are from the Dutch East Indies, which is now called Indonesia. My mother's, I guess, ethnic makeup would be Dutch, Indonesian, and Chinese. So they mixed with the European colonists for about 300 to 400 years, created kind of a Creole population that like lived with the kind of elites, still not quite like the pure bloods, I guess is what they would call them back in the day. But that's what they are. When Indonesia gained independence, they kicked out all the Dutch and all the people loyal to the Dutch. So by blood, we were Dutch because we were mixed.
Yeah.
They kicked out, went to the Netherlands, thought, holy crap, it's cold here. So they then from there they spread all over the place. So like my grandparents went to the United States, but their brothers and sisters went to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, like all over Thailand. So it's they're kind of spread out. But identity wise, half Dutch coming from that mix. My father is a typical, I guess, Californian in the sense that he's like mixed. So he's half Mexican Jewish and he is half Scottish. So there's like that kind of mix there too. So like my dad also is a type of mixture of different cultures as well. So I grew up in a military family going from state to state every few years. I know Jocelyn has a similar story.
Yeah.
It makes you curious about things, but it also makes you realize you're not yet established in any of those places. So that's why I started to call myself third culture. I have passports from different countries. I have different family from different countries. Even in the United States, where I grew up place to place, I wasn't really part of that culture. So I had to adjust. So that's, I guess, my background in education. I did my bachelor's and my first master's in cultural anthropology. My curiosity for mixed race people and just different, I guess, patterns of migration made me kind of get into education and want to teach students from linguistic backgrounds that weren't native to English. So that's what made me go abroad. And then I lived in Korea for 2.5 years. Now I live in Honduras. So there you go. Long story, but there it is.
No, I think it's necessary because I think it helps our viewers, because I've known you for some time now, to be able to see where that level of expertise came from. I love that it's not just books for you. You've lived it. You've lived it through your parents who were obviously open and honest with you about their backgrounds and had an understanding of their history, because not everybody does. I know in my family that wasn't necessarily the case. And so I think that's beautiful. And for me, then it poses the question, as a child, can you think back to, did you identify yourself and were you aware that, oh, snap, I'm a third culture kid?
Yeah. Well, actually, to be honest, I never heard the phrase until maybe 3-ish years ago.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was living in Korea. A lot of the foreigners in Korea, I kind of like make friends and like we get along and whatnot,
Yeah.
regardless. And there was this friend that I met. He was Filipino American, but he was raised in, I believe it was Cambodia or Thailand as a missionary kid. His parents
Mhm.
were from Manila, Philippines.
Yeah.
He had citizenship from the United States because he was born there, and he grew up in Thailand, I think it was. So like
Interesting.
he brought up this term third culture because I was like, well, okay, where are you from? Like you have an interesting background. Where would you consider yourself from? I always ask those questions. Even when I first met you, Ian and Jocelyn, I'm like, where are you guys from? Not hi, how are you doing? But yeah, how are you doing?
Right.
Where are you from? And he kind of explained this like idea of third culture. Like you're not living in a place that either of your parents are from and you're not
Mhm.
even from there. For example, let's take a immigrant to the United States. One
Mhm.
parent's from Guatemala, one parent is from Mexico, but the child is born and raised an American. That's
Right.
kind of cross-cultural, multicultural. But a third culture means like you're even removed from the place you were born and raised. So that just made me kind of curious about this. I went down a rabbit trail because I always had a hard time explaining to people how I identified, where my people came from and whatnot. So I
For
just
sure.
took it from there and said, okay, I'm just third culture. I'll use that.
I love that. However, you were born in
I
which
was
state?
born in the United States.
Which state?
I was born in California, San Diego, but I was raised
Ah,
in all over the place, mainly in the South, the American
right,
South, so
because of
Tennessee.
the traveling with the military family.
Yeah, and going back actually to your question, where are you from?
Mhm.
It's hard to say, to be honest. Growing up in
As
the United States as a child that has to like doesn't have, I guess, older people that have these stories, doesn't have the language or vocabulary to talk about this.
yeah.
It was hard because when I was with my Latino family or Latino friends, I was El Chinito, the Chinese guy, you know? When I was with my
Mhm.
Filipino friends, which I'm part Asian, I was the Jew. You know what I mean? When I was with like
Right.
with like my white friends, I was the Mexican. When I was with my black
Each group
friends,
identified you.
I was the white guy. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
each place, it's kind of hard growing up as a child because you're from everywhere, but you don't, in a sense, belong to any of those places. And you have to, especially as a kid, you take what people think about you really seriously. So
Mhm.
like having other people kind of put identities or put like non-belonging on you, that was difficult to, I guess, navigate,
Yeah.
which has kind of propelled me to research it more to kind of with my daughter. And if I have more kids, what are you? People are going to ask her that, where are you from? And to let her
Yeah.
celebrate that, I guess, international mindset of you're just from all over the place. So,
Yeah, that's I can totally relate to that. And for those who are who are currently watching this, please go ahead and type any questions you may have for either one of us. I can identify with you, Rainier, because I know for me, I didn't know about the term third culture until meeting you.
yeah.
And looking back, I didn't identify. I think I identified, as all third culture kids do, that I don't belong.
Mm,
I try to go into different boxes and I try to identify with people. However, I don't belong. And so, growing up as a first generation kid from whose parents are from Trinidad and Tobago, originally in California, and then moving to New York when I was about 13, 14, the nuances that were in the communities I was in, they were just so head scratching, for
yeah.
lack of better words. So in California, it was I was around a lot of Latinos,
Mm,
um, Asians like Koreans, some Chinese, few Japanese, and then that changed over time. And I was like, well, there's pocket like we have a lot of commonalities, but it was different. And then your home life. So my home life is very much we are Trinidad and Tobago. So much so that I would refer to myself as I'm Trinidadian
yeah.
until I would visit Trinidad and Tobago for summer. And guess what they would call me?
American.
American or the
Yeah.
rich Yankee. I was like,
Yeah.
I know I'm not rich.
Yeah.
Their perception of me based on my language, based on how I dressed, was automatically, oh, rich American.
Mhm.
And then as I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast, it quickly changed to, oh, okay, you're this weird American white speaking black guy.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was always just so interesting. And so I figured out as early as maybe, I don't know, 13, sadly, that you can identify in other ways. So for me, one of the ways I connected with people was instruments. So I played the clarinet, and that was a commonality between Americans because the popular instrument, I don't know if you guys know, in Trinidad and Tobago is the steel drum. So you
Okay.
find a lot more people playing the steel drum as opposed to these other instruments.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so another thing was dancing. Fortunately for me, my father had assimilated a certain dance style within Trinidad and Tobago that was actually from the States. And so I just kind of picked up where he left off. So I connected with people there. Another
Yeah.
way was through sports, connected through people there. And so it's, for me, it was interesting finding those pockets of commonality to where I was like, well, I don't really know what I am. However, how can I cultivate what I want to be? And I started assimilating the dance hall music culture that I liked from my family and calypso and soca and assimilating it with the new hip hop that was new to me. So to give you context, I didn't connect musically with hip hop itself, like rap music, beautiful R&B, until high school.
Wow.
So my wife laughs at me all the time. She's like, "You don't know this song? You don't know that song? You don't know this movie? You don't know that movie?" No, totally removed from it.
But that you bring up a really interesting like reality though is like people who come from multiple different like arenas or different like wavelengths of culture, like we can't really just be put in a box. And I
Yeah,
think that's one thing that's interesting because how you're explaining your upbringing, I had friends in Nashville where I kind of grew up from the Bahamas and Jamaica and
yeah,
some of the other islands, and they had the exact same situation that you had in New York, where people
yeah,
would tell them, "What, you guys are a coconut? Are you an Oreo? Are you this?"
yeah,
And
yeah,
different things. But then like it brings up this really curious, I guess, like cultural notion that like just because your skin is a certain color doesn't mean you have to go into a box that even society has created for you. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So that's really interesting that you bring that up, you know?
yeah, man. Another question I have for you, I'll just read it off here, is how do you believe your upbringing shaped your childhood? Kind of touched on that. And I'm talking home life, friends, and school like that.
Yeah, oh, that's a loaded question. Okay, so how it affected like my adult trajectory or like my childhood growing up?
Yeah, how do you think you being a third culture kid shaped who you are today?
Yeah. Well, to start, when I was younger, I felt like you said you kind of like understood it when you were 13. It
Mhm.
took me till I was probably 19 or 20 to fully understand it, to be honest. As a kid, I always wanted to have an established life. I
Mhm.
wanted to stay in one place, have a hometown, which I never had, have like a people group, be involved in like a religious community to like just be established as like that's my community. And I was seeking that my whole life, whether I realized it or didn't realize it until I was older. And I thought to myself, you know what? I don't care. Like, I'm from everywhere. I need to celebrate it. But I think, in a
Yeah,
sense, having a mother who's Dutch, but she didn't speak Dutch at the home, so we didn't speak Dutch. She looks not Dutch because she's dark, the traditional Dutch, you know what I mean? Having a father who was mixed race when mixed race was really hard in the United States back in the day, you know what I mean?
yeah,
So having that kind of the language, the culture, the eating nachos but putting Gouda cheese on them, like you know what I mean? The mixing of these different things kind of made me just a curious person, and it made me accept people also and ask questions. I remember my parents
mhm,
would tell me when I was a kid, I'd always ask why. But it's because I was observing these things. I'd ask why.
sure,
Like why are one of my brothers have reddish blondish hair in their beard and I have like dark indigenous features? Why is this? Why don't I look like the white kids that are in my neighborhood? Why is it that this? You ask those questions, and my parents were like real enough to just answer them.
Yeah.
They didn't have to be like, well, things are different. You'll find out later. They were like, you come from like different places. Your family in California is half ginger and half Mexican Jewish. You know what I mean? Your family in the Netherlands, we look Filipino, but we're Dutch. Like that's the conversation just always had. So I guess that kind of shaped my curiosity to then become an anthropologist, to then become an international school teacher, and just ask that question throughout my whole life to people. Why is this? Why is this? Why is this? So yeah.
I appreciate that. And I definitely identify with you with that natural inclination to observe people. Looking back now, at the time, I was just, survival mode, just trying to figure life out like the rest of us. However, I look back now and I'm like, I think I really paid attention to how people responded and reacted to everything. And I think over time, I was able to be shaped with this kind of, I'm very accepting to people. I'm very accepting of their differences instead of what's different about us, And so I think that very much resonates with my core, to where it doesn't matter who you are, because I know firsthand what it's like to be on the negative side of that and on the positive side of that, in terms of, having some favor. Yeah. Because I do understand certain nuances. So going back to when I was living in New York as a high school student, I was able to connect with a lot of people because of my island roots in the pocket of New York I was in, Brooklyn, Flatbush. And then whenever we would go outside of those pockets and meet more of the corporate America side, again, the privilege of my parents kind of setting the trenches and teaching me at home, hey, here are things you say, here's how you present yourself. Very easy to code switch and navigate through those areas, sometimes better than my peers, because I understood, we're different and we're going to be perceived differently.
Yeah, I think as you were talking about that, the one word I was thinking in my head was code switching, code switching, code switching. You said, and I was like, I'm glad you said it, because there are a lot of benefits to growing up like this. I know we're like, I don't want anyone to think that we're traumatized by our upbringing because we had to go place to place. Yeah. But there are huge benefits to this. Like you said, you can code switch. You are always going to be the gatekeeper to many cultures. Yes. Like that is a privilege. I can be the gatekeeper to bringing my two racial families together. I can be a gatekeeper to bringing my two politically sided families together or religious families together. Right. Growing up, you have those skills that even as a little kid, you can code switch. You can realize, I'm in an uppity thing. I have to kind of switch it off. I have to be more professional, stand up straighter, and speak more firmly. Where if I'm somewhere else, you can be more relaxed. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of benefits to it. This type of, I guess, upbringing.
Yeah. So I want to bring up your baby girl because she's beautiful, and now that you are a father, and how old is Aurora now?
She's 5.5 months.
Ooh, already?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We picked her up from the stroller today and bonked her head. And we were like, oh, she's getting so big.
Yeah, she's a beautiful and tall growing baby girl. Mm-hmm. So now you as the dad hat role, what are some things you're currently doing for your daughter, knowing that she's currently in an environment where she is very likely to be a third culture kid?
Yeah, I think because you guys started the international route as parents, which is kind of interesting. I want to hear about that, actually, like your decisions. I think for us, my wife's very, very amazing, Leia. She has a father from Mexico, a mother from Honduras. Mm-hmm. She grew up in California and Texas. So she also has that kind of like flowy, and us too, since we've been married and even when we were dating, we've always been the throw the seeds where they go and let's go where they land, if that kind of makes sense. Like, I saw an advertisement for Korea. Oh, do you know much about Korea? Me neither. Let's go try the food. It's delicious. Let's move there for 2.5 years. Right. That's how we've always been, just like, let's go move even across the states. Now that I'm a father, we have to be strategic about it. And we have to be, I think the biggest word is, since she was born and when she was in the womb, purposeful with it. We have to be really purposeful with what we do. Right now, Honduras, it's a lovely place. People are wonderful, beautiful. Raising a kid here seems really nice because there's nature, lots of kids. Coming from Asia and even Europe, there's like shortages of kids. So Aurora doesn't look strange to have like us have a kid out in a park, like breastfeeding in public or anything like that. It's just normal. But I think, we're thinking more of the future, if that makes sense. We're thinking as an educator, what type of education we want to give her, not just the environment, but the actual, I guess, style of school. You know what I mean? And I don't know exactly what we're going to do, but we're aiming towards eventually going to the Netherlands. Because having lived in Korea, here in Honduras, we love it, right? But Aurora's going to have 3 to 4 cultures. She's going to have grandparents, one from Mexico, one from Honduras, one from the Netherlands, one from the United States. Like, that's a lot. That's not even her great grandparents. That's her grandparents. So like each grandparent is from a different nation. So different places are really good at being cross-cultural. Cross-cultural, I'd like to explain as like many of our students, Ian, for example, they're Honduran, but they also have a foot in the United States. So they're part of that like cross-cultural, two-cultural kind of thing. Now, Aurora is multicultural. So I think the idea of having an Asian-looking Jewish kid who also speaks a European language and Spanish, the one place in the world that I think that would not be weird is the Netherlands. So because it's so multicultural, because an international school in the Netherlands for her would have kids that look like her, would have a kid from Korea, a kid from like Pakistan, a kid from many different countries, to where she as a multicultural person would be celebrated and appreciated. So I think when it comes to strategically how we're going to raise her and where we're going to raise her, I wouldn't be shocked if we eventually, nothing against Honduras or Korea or the United States. Again, a lot of people leave the United States and they're like, US sucks, blah, blah, blah. I'm not like that at all. Like, I love the United States.
Gotcha.
And I like you guys with your channel, I try to like show the beautiful side of Honduras that nobody knows, how like lovely it is and like accepting. But when it comes to our daughter and being strategic and purposeful with her upbringing, I think the Netherlands is in our future.
Beautiful, beautiful. If I may, I went ahead and I put up some of Mr. Rainier Lee's photographs he's actually taken here in Honduras. And these are really beautiful shots, man.
Thanks. Yeah, it's my goal to, I guess, as I'm going through different countries, especially here too, because I guess my wife's family, part of them come from here. I love kind of displaying the beauty of Honduras and like what it actually is. It's not just these violent headlines and these like migrant caravans going to the United States and stuff. It's like a beautiful country that's diverse in language, diverse in culture, diverse in like nature. And I don't know, I think it's a beautiful place.
Well, from your pictures, I would definitely say that it is.
Thanks.
You are a multi-talented brother, man.
Thanks. I'm just curious. That's what it is.
And yeah, we need more of that. So as a third culture kid, now full-grown third culture adult, I think Jocelyn and I are definitely having a conversation of what type of kids do we want to develop. And to your point, what's going to be the best place for us currently to continue to raise our kids? And so I think you and your lovely wife got it right in terms of both of you being on the same page about that early on in Aurora's life. Whereas for me, I'll be honest, I was stubborn. I was like, I don't know if I really want to go outside of the country, probably because of subconscious fears that I've had of things I had to go through and having to assimilate to different cultures. And just touching on it a little bit, there was growing up some bullying done towards me because I was different and it was noticeably different. And
Yeah.
I quickly gained the skills necessary to assimilate so that I wasn't picked on, so that I did have friends.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of caught between this rock and hard place of I'm grateful because I got to learn those skills because I am a third culture kid. And then there's other times where, as a married man, happily married to Jocelyn, seeing how we have just cultural differences that clash sometimes. And it's not even my Trinidad and Tobago roots. It's my adopting some of this, adopting some of that, and
Yeah.
not understanding some of the nuances because she and I, when we first met, it was like, okay, well, we're both Black. But then there's it's like an iceberg, what's underneath the water, the surface, these deeper conversations
Yeah. It's true.
that we just believe because of how we were raised.
It's crazy though, because it is people see on the outside, but not what's culture. Because Leigh and I too, we both look kind of, I guess, mestizo
For
or
sure.
like
Yeah.
Latino and stuff. You know what I mean? But when we got married, it was like, holy smokes. She runs on Latin time. I run on Northern European time. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's this different type of clash that we had. But I'd also like to talk more about that, Ian, because I think those are like really things. Because like we grew up, I think, from that generation where racism, you shrugged it off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The micro, the macro, the like in your face racism, you shrugged it off and you said, no, I'm just gonna do it. But like, how did you navigate that as a kid, and what type of stuff would happen, if you don't mind me asking?
No, not at all. So, and feel free to chime in.
Yeah.
My father was really good about, so quick little background. My father is one of the best dancers out of Trinidad and Tobago, hands down. He's in newspaper articles. As a child, whenever I went home, people knew who I was because of who he was. So context. And so he learned through show business, essentially, how to present himself. And so that's what I learned. I just learned this is how you present yourself. I feel like I'm straying away from your question. Repeat the question again.
No. I think that's important actually, because like that is like, it gives a detail of, you said you kind of, we blend, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like we blend. We see the conversation heading a certain way, and we just join it, or we kind of like see a thing going, or we do it. I know, like an example for me, kind of like what you're talking about, like how to present yourself.
Yeah.
We're both men of color teaching in primary.
Exactly.
We're not going to yell. You know what I mean? We're not going to yell. We're not going to shout. We're going to be a little extra. You know what I mean? Like
extra lighthearted and
lighthearted, extra like kind.
Yeah.
We're not going to raise our voice and stuff, but that example goes to our whole life. So I think that's probably what you're kind of you're alluding to, is like your dad taught you how to present yourself, to realize, I'm sure you have to present yourself in different social environments differently, you know?
Yeah. And so I think race as a whole, his mindset, especially coming to the States, was he comes from a culture and world where he's already seen people who look like him in all stages. Wealthy, powerful, a good person, an unkind person, kind of a jerk, a welcoming person. And so his mindset became my mindset, which was there's people who do right and there's people who do wrong. And so although color is there, because of that kind of nuanced background, it was hard for me to sometimes see things that were overtly or covertly racist, to be honest. And I was just like, oh, they're just wrong, or they're a jerk. Or sometimes I'd be naive enough to believe, okay, they do have an interest in me. And really no, that's not the case at all.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean, because it's the same too. Like for me growing up, like I'd shrug off the Holocaust jokes. You know what I mean? Like, oh, they're making Holocaust jokes, but that's bad. Or, oh, they're calling me chink or something, like that's bad. Or they're doing the things. And you just, because I had the same thing. My grandma's Mexican American. She's from the Chicana era.
Yeah.
And she kind of became middle class. So it's like I had that kind of look. I see a brown person that's successful. I can achieve it. Now,
Yeah.
I'm curious though, from a Trinidadian and Tobago perspective, with a wealthy, like successful father, and Jocelyn's, did y'all clash at all with how you identify as Black, or like how you perceived Black America, you know, with like all these happenings and so forth?
So disclaimer, speaking solely for myself, because I don't want to speak for all U.S. Black American men. For me, it's a constant day by day thing of building my reality of this is what a man is. And for me, it's important to distinguish, well, one, to be aware that I am at the time, I was a Black man living in America. And there are things that come with that. So I knew a little bit from my dad, but a lot from trial and error. What does that mean and look like? And to be honest, a lot of Jocelyn's side of the family and just my friends who all their lives, all they know is the United States, have had to educate me on, hey, it's really not okay if people who don't look like us or who aren't from our culture, because there are exceptions that understand and were born into the culture of Black America. This is what is okay. This is what's not okay. And I'm still learning, man. I don't always get it right. Sometimes people have said and done offensive things to me, to my wife, to my kids. And I've needed some help with identifying, oh, okay. Because my mindset has always gone back to, well, is this right or wrong? What's the context of it? And how can I make this situation better? Now I think it's a little bit more mature to, as a man, as a Black man, how am I being seen? How am I being treated in this moment? And is this a situation where me and my family are being threatened and we need to leave safety-wise, which my wife is excellent at identifying? Or is it, okay, this person is clearly having a racist moment or don't even understand that they're being racist? And the time to just educate them on the spot. And something very powerful but simple my wife had taught me. Shout out to our wonderful wives who are constantly teaching us, am I right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes it's just as simple, right? Sometimes it's as simple as expressing how you feel in that moment.
Yeah, so like that's one thing I realized when I got married. Like, talk about your feelings. You're bundling stuff up, and you explode. Like, why are you doing that? A simple question of like having our wives, I guess, like make us self-reflect. Why are you doing that? Like, but not like why are you doing that, but like why are you doing that? And it makes you reflect on your life and like, oh my gosh. But could you provide like an example of something like that, what you're talking about, when it comes to like a micro or a macro that you've had on your family, or even you that you've had?
Sure. So I'll give an example. There was a time where me and my father's high school, we're driving. Again, he's from Trinidad and Tobago. However, he's been here since late teens, young adult. And so we got pulled over. I knew we didn't break any laws. My dad was just driving down a regular street in New York, Brooklyn, New York. The cop was European American, and he asked for license registrations, blah, blah, blah. And I was going to talk and ask my dad, hey, why did he pull us over? We didn't do anything. He had been here obviously longer than me to just tell me to be quiet in a tone and register that I knew, okay, just watch. And so because my dad was wise enough to just articulate himself, suppress his accent as much as he could, just give the officer what he wanted so that we can go home. And then later on, just that one-on-one dialogue of, that's just how it is here. Obviously, you don't really experience that in Trinidad and Tobago. However, here, this is going to happen sometimes, and it sucks. And there's nothing you can do about it except play the game. And when I say play the game, I mean, for my dad, I would say more so than me, because he protected me from a lot of that. He had to learn how to talk to non-Black people and what were the consequences if he didn't talk to them, interact with them in a certain way. Because there were times outside of that example where I felt like, man, again, trusting your feeling, that's wrong. However, I wasn't identifying that's racist. And so bringing it back to the third culture kids, it was really, really important to me as the climate in the United States was getting really rocky towards people of color, where, I mean, it seemed like every week, Rainier, no joke, I'm sure you remember the news and headlines, Black people were being killed, not arrested, not falsely accused, killed.
Yeah.
Boys,
like shot, like
women.
you drive into the wrong cul-de-sac, you're shot. Like that's crazy, you know.
I mean, from jogging to being asleep.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so my wife and I had that hard and honest conversation. You know, let's raise our kids somewhere else.
Yeah.
And we both have a huge love and admiration for the Latino culture and Spanish speakers everywhere. And so we wanted our kids to assimilate and gain that language,
Mm-hmm.
Gain respect and love for that culture. I think that culture has been good to me and Jocelyn. And so we made the move to Honduras. So now that we're here, we're both learning. Honestly, I've learned personally a lot from you. Well, be mindful of these third culture things,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Because some of the difficulties that I'm actually studying in my master's program, I'll list off a few and feel free to chime in. Some of the challenges I'm learning that I did face and our kids will soon face is difficulty establishing a sense of identity, feeling like an outsider, which you and I both talked to,
Mm-hmm.
experiencing culture shock and reverse culture shock.
Yeah.
That's a big one. I would love to hear your perspective on that. Schooling and challenging, adapting to norms, and feeling isolation.
Mm. Yeah, I'm kind of like taking notes right now because I have some stuff to say.
No, please do.
No, I think the culture shock is obvious, but what a lot of people don't realize is the reverse culture shock is real. So your kids, let's say they live in Latin America for 3, 4, 5 years, and they go back each summer. They're gonna slowly become more Latino. You know what I mean? They're gonna slowly become more, I don't know, identify more with this other culture to where they realize, oh wow, my cousin's back in the States, they don't speak Spanish. My cousin's back in the state, they think Puerto Rico's part of Mexico. You know what I mean? My cousin's back in the state, like think someone who looks Afro-Latino is from Saudi Arabia. Like, you know what I mean? Like these different things, the more you're abroad, the more you're kind of exposed to, but also you're not realizing what's happening in the United States, which is like, we are going through a big, like social movement, like in social change and shift. Things are getting more nationalistic across the world, but in the States, it's attached to like, you know, racism and like ethnocentrism and so forth. But I think the norms too is really interesting. How you say norms, and then how you said like right after norms, you said isolation. Yeah. So I think us not being able to adapt to norms as third culture people or new teachers abroad or kids growing up in a different culture, that leads to isolation. And a lot of norms, people might think a norm is you take your shoes off when you go in the house. A norm is you bow to someone to show respect in Korea or Japan. Those are obvious norms. Norms that kids go through, and I'm going to be real with you, Ian, and I'm going to be real with our viewers. Norms that the kids will go through are there might be no black kids in your school. Yeah. That the kids with blue eyes and green eyes and white skin get preferential treatment from the teachers and the assistants. Those are the norms that I think people don't talk about that lead to isolation. So the cultural norms of Latin culture is very welcoming. It's beautiful, but the reality is European people or peninsular or whatever you talked about that back in the day are seen as more pretty, more beautiful. What is that like for a mestizo kid, or what is that like for an Afro-Latino kid in Honduras? The reality is that kid's going to be yelled at more. And when you're coming from another country with brown skin and you're yelled at more, you don't know the historical context of that. You don't know the cultural context, the social context. So I think those type of norms that like really affect kids and there's no name for it because they're kids, that's what leads to isolation.
That's such a great point, Rainier, and I'm so glad you touched on it. And for me, as a dad, it was the reverse. So I noticed for me and our kids, this was one of the first years where I didn't get any complaints about my oldest son, Monty.
Mm.
This is the first time where all of my kids during the break begged to go back to school. This is the first, you know what I'm saying? So they kind of had it rough in their country of origin, my country of origin. However, once we moved out of that environment, it was different. I talk to my kids more. I play with my kids more. I'm less stressed. I have one job, Rainier. And that was coming from having 2, sometimes 3 jobs. And so I think that plays into being a third culture kid and then trying to raise a third culture kid, being mindful, like you said, of, okay, well, what are not just the norms for the adults in that culture, really being keen to what are the cultural norms for the students of that culture and their age level.
Yeah.
Because I'm learning quickly as the kids get older, the social groups change. And it really becomes less about culture from at least just me watching and observing middle school and high school. But it starts to become those haves and have-nots.
I see.
Those who are gravitating towards culturally what's popular. So a certain artist may be popular. If you don't think they're popular and you like a more unpopular artist, that's going to affect the social groups. The hangouts or the thing to do. For me, it was dancing, and I was able to connect with people. Maybe in this culture, okay, dancing's not a thing. So now since that's not a norm, you're seen as less than. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what and it's navigating that as someone moving back and forth. And I think you raised a really good reality is a lot of people of color coming from the United States going to Latin America. That's like, wow, I'm not treated like a second-class citizen. You know what I mean? So like that is also reverse culture shock to where you go back to the States and you realize you like reflect, wow, was my childhood like really stressful? Like I'm sure Monty might be going through this in his head, even though if he doesn't realize it. Did I have racism from my teachers in the States? Did these things happen that I'm just now realizing? You know what I mean?
For sure.
But yeah, I like how you bring that up because you're right. Things are changing, and like dominant cultures, whether it's U.S. music, K-pop now, different things will be popular for kids, and that will be like the social status of like social currency. You know what I mean? So you kind of have to, as your kid's growing up, realize each different developmental phase has a social currency. What is that social currency? It might not be race. It might not be economics. It might not be social hierarchy, but maybe it's just shoes. Whatever they wear the nice shoes. Maybe it's movies, or maybe it's an accent. Different things like that. So that's a good thing to observe. And I guess like us growing up, like we did have to do that. Like we did have to think about it. Like, oh, I'm gonna go hang out with like this group. I'm gonna dress a little different, or I'm gonna like speak a little different. So that's very interesting.
With your background and knowledge, what resources would you recommend to families who are seeking a life abroad and very much will be in for if they have kids, or even if they're thinking about having kids? How can they prepare themselves? What resources should they grab or pick up to raise third culture kids?
I think many articles, if you just Google third culture kids, there will be a lot of articles, but those articles are usually Eurocentric, meaning like they're written from kids growing up in Europe. So it's like realistically, not all of us are going to go work in Europe. It's very hard to get in. So I would read this book called Third Culture Kids. It's by Ruth something. She's a sociologist. Talks really well. Big book, something like 400 or 500 pages. And there are different chapters on the stages of denial, grief, understanding that you can kind of read through and understand, wow, like I had this upbringing, or, oh my goodness, my kid's going to go through this. And all the resources will tell you one thing, and that is to celebrate where they are and celebrate who they are. So for example, if you guys live in Honduras, celebrate being in Honduras. Your kids are here. You're part of the community. There are Garifuna who look like you. There's like a population here. Like, you're speaking Spanish. You're swimming with the kids. Like, your kids are swimming with the kids. They're playing baseball with the kids. Celebrate that. But also celebrate where you're from. Are you guys from Atlanta? Are you from California? Whatever it is, celebrate that. Like, yeah, like Monty, you live in Honduras, but you're also from Atlanta. Be proud of that. I know I have some kids that they're like, I'm from Miami because they're born in Miami. And I'm like, be proud of that. You're from Miami. My Miami boy. Like, that's okay. So celebrate it, and then acknowledge the grief of moving. So a lot of kids, I don't know if your kids have gone through this phase, but like in any move to another country, they're going to go through a depressive phase because they are relating all of their new knowledge, their new experiences to their past experience. So acknowledge that grief, acknowledge where they came from, celebrate where they came from, but also be excited about where they are right now. Go to, like, I see you guys go to Garifuna, like, celebrations. You guys go to the park, you go different places. Like, that's a good way to make them feel part of this community. Gotcha. And wherever you go, if you go anywhere else, like the same exact thing. So resources, yeah, I'd say that book, Third Culture Kids, any article you read, there can be a short article on Google that I've read where it talks about just like the grief process, talks about building community, how to build culture. Talk to people who have done it. Mm-hmm. I know I spoke to Kevin Barnett from our school, Ian. Yes. He created the curriculum. Mm-hmm. He's married to a Honduran, and he grew up, his kids grew up all over the place, primarily in Belgium and the Netherlands. Yeah. And I said, look, Kevin, like, I just had a daughter. What should I do? And he said one culture or two cultures at the house that are officially a culture. So, for example, ours would be American. Both my wife and I are from America, United States. Our kid should be American too. We're going to speak English to her at the house. We're going to call ourselves from the United States. We're going to have that identity. So when she's going place to place to place to place, she has something to hold on to.
She's got a base.
She has to build that base. So when everything comes crashing down, she can go back to that base. So that's kind of one different thing. You can, of course, teach them Spanish, teach them another language, do anything like that. But if you have a kid born abroad, he said, have a base language and a base culture so they can feel identity and go back to that country whenever they feel lost, if that makes sense.
That is excellent advice. I appreciate that. And I'll be
from Kevin.
Shout out to Kevin. I'll be honest. I was not prepared for the different forms of grief. So be a little vulnerable. Our daughter, and my wife spoke on it a little bit, one of our videos. She had a real rough transition. And by rough, I mean behavior-wise, she was acting out. She was really angry and upset. And I'm an adult not understanding, okay, here's a little girl who's primarily spoken English, was primarily around boys and girls who look like her, other kids as well. Primarily,
there's a percentage of kids that look like her, at least.
Yeah, look like her. And when she tried to talk to her peers, the first few weeks, majority of the class spoke Spanish. And so I had to learn how to support her through that. I had to learn how to work with the teachers there. And we had great support at the school we were at. Great support, obviously, from my wife. And we just are more mindful of that now. And I would definitely encourage parents to ask those questions, whatever school they plan on taking their kids to overseas. What type of programs or what families can they speak to so that they can help their kids ease into this new culture? Because it is a shock and it affects children differently. So I know for our daughter, her grief lasted like a month or two, probably a little longer. Yeah. And then once she, like you were saying, continue to identify it at home, who she is as an American, a person from the United States, and then building friendships here. Oh yes, my friend, here's my friend. She'll say these adults are her friends. These are my friends because they just loved up on her. Now they're speaking English, they're speaking Spanish. They loved up on her. She's like, well, I don't know what you're saying. However, I see how you're treating me. And over time, that built the trust. And over time, the reserve or the pushback of, I don't want to learn Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I want to learn Spanish. And she outright asked, hey, outside of school, can I learn Spanish, mom and dad? Because she's building friendships and started to build a block. Me as an adult, the parent of this third culture kid, I want to be able to talk to her friends' parents. Not all of them speak English. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of them speak Spanish. And so now it becomes a family thing. You and your child, your third culture kid, are learning the language, learning the
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
You both can lean on each other. Hey, it was a hard day. I really wanted to communicate with my friend. I couldn't. I felt sad about it.
Yeah.
And making that a norm
Yeah.
as you're living life with your third culture kid.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it perfectly too, because a lot of people go as international schools and they don't mix with the local population. And I know if you are teaching in the United States or you like live in like the US or something, you're like, why wouldn't they? It is very common that they don't. So like beyond common, like what my wife has family here, you guys got involved with a lot of the community, like that's rare. You know what I mean? Like, so, but you have to do that. You have to look, we as a family are celebrating Honduras. We as a family are dancing on like you guys dance in the folkloria.
Yes.
For like the folkloria day, you're celebrating it. Maybe she doesn't see it or notice it, or I guess doesn't talk about it, but she notices it.
Right.
Look, mommy and daddy are celebrating. I see mommy and daddy dressed like a caballeros and stuff, and like, okay, like maybe that's part of me too, you know? So yeah, mix with it, but you also mentioned it 2 months. That's normal. Like, you know what I mean? That might sound like a long time, but that's totally normal. It could take a whole year, like for kids to kind of come in. I had a student, her parents were Honduran. She was raised in Ontario. And they were like, let's go like have her like study her Honduran like culture and be Honduran. That was the most Toronto girl I've seen in the entire world. Like she hated it here. She was like, Mr. Rain, her little list, Mr. Wayne, why is everybody speaking Spanish? I don't understand them. And she's like, they're telling me I'm Honduran, but I don't understand them. Like, I just want to go back to Canada and make a snowman. Like,
poor thing.
But I tell the parents, like, because they're like, we're not speaking English to her at home. We're only speaking Spanish. We're taking away pictures. I was like, no, don't do that. Even like, I even told them, bring a picture of her home, bring her favorite teddy bear, bring pictures of her friends, bring it to the class. Because truth be told, half of the students have the exact same story. So like, you need to celebrate that individualism of where you come from, your life story, your kind of like past, like that is who you are. So yeah, like that's good that you guys are like that, but also it encourages them to participate. It took her 3 months, but then she started speaking Spanish. It took her like 3 months, but then she started playing with the other girls because she realized there's a Honduran born and raised kid who like has no friends. So I guess I'm gonna go be friends with them. They don't speak English. I don't speak Spanish. Like, make those connections. You know what I mean? So yeah, the grief process can take time, but stay connected with the community, lead by example, and be patient with it. Be patient with it and read up on it like you and I have. Like, that's really important. Read up on it and ask questions. Like we said, like folks have 20-something-year-old kids who went through the exact same thing, and they'll be like, give you examples. That's what I'm doing. I'm asking everybody. I'm like, you look like an old person. You're not from Honduras. How did you do it? Do you have kids?
Yeah, that's the way to go. And thank you for all the nuggets and wisdom you've been sharing throughout this entire interview. But before you leave, because I think we're just about wrapping up, if there are any questions, please go ahead and type it in below. I would love for you to share with the audience your blog, if you wouldn't mind sharing that, because I think it's one of those things that is necessary because it's going to be updated.
Yeah.
And families that want to live this life abroad lifestyle and want a clear perspective on the wide range of, okay, you have this third culture kid. Here are some tips and tricks along the way as you just have your journey abroad. So what is the blog that you have that we can reach out to?
Yeah, so I have two. I have like just a typical Instagram account, Third Culture Rain. I really encourage you guys to like look that up. That's me kind of trying to highlight places I live, but also like present Honduras as a land of beauty, not a land of poverty and violence. Because like I think you and I would agree, like that's such a
100%.
ethnocentric stereotype that's like just really stupid. But people ask me that. I moved here from Korea and they're like, "Are you safe?" "Oh my gosh, you're in San Pedro Sula." And I'm like, at a McDonald's. Like, what are you talking about? So follow me on my Instagram if you want, Third Culture Rain, or just check it out to kind of support the beauty of Honduras. But I started with a friend, one of the teachers that I met in South Korea. She, like me, has two passports, parents from England, but she was raised in South Africa, and we were both teaching in
Oh,
South
wow.
Korea. So we're both writers. We acknowledge that blogs are dying, but we're using it more as like a journal site for third culture people. So I really would
Yeah.
consider looking it up. Third Culture Lens. We lens because we have a different perspective of life and where we travel. .squarespace.com, because we can't afford to have like a real website yet. But I encourage you to check it out. We talk about what it's like to for me, getting Dutch citizenship. We talk about first impressions of living in Honduras. We talk about what it's like working in South Korea and only getting 10 days vacation time a year. Like we talk about these real things where it's like, yeah, it's true. But we talk about these realities and we're tired, to like frame it, we're tired of seeing stupid see Bali in 10 days, travel Honduras in 5 days. Oh, I went to visit the most dangerous country called Honduras, and it's just pictures of Roatan.
Yep.
Oh, go see Europe. We're tired of that. We're like, just be quiet. You guys are tourists. You're not travelers. But
Thank you.
we
Well
wanted
said.
we wanted to present. We're both photographers. The lens of photography and a place through a third culture perspective. So that's why it's called Third Culture Lens, because we're presenting stories of Honduras, not from a Westerner who visited for two weeks, but from someone who lives there, someone who works there. We wanted to present the things with living in South Korea. What is it like? It's not just K-pop and temples and beautiful autumn colors. The
Yeah.
reality of living there, like different strategies you have to make to like survive in these different places.
Yeah.
And we're totally open to other people contributing. So if you go into it, it's kind of new. We have maybe like 15 articles from around the world, but you can contribute. Just email us on there, kind of an article anywhere in the world. We don't want, hey, I traveled to Mexico, Cancun. We
Right.
want deep things like what it's like being a Black teacher in Japan, what it's like being like the only Jewish person living in my city. Those deep questions
Yeah.
we want to talk about, because that's where culture is. We can show you a beautiful picture of like the beach or like a church or a cathedral or a temple, but we're telling the story behind it. And that's what I encourage. We're going to start a YouTube channel soon, probably in the summer. Hopefully, we
Yes.
can like collaborate, Ian, you and Jocelyn. But yeah, little by little, poco a poco, we're building, because we want to give a voice to third culture people who can celebrate their life of, hey, I lived in 8 different countries when I was in elementary school. Well, that's crazy, but what was elementary through middle? Like those type of stories where it's like you can celebrate that. You can talk about my father's. I know I talk my mother's from the Netherlands, my father's from the U.S., but I live in Honduras, so I'm going to write about Honduras and talk about my perspective of it. So yeah, I encourage you guys to do that, and then also stay following the Minerves on the Move. That's one resource that I did kind of forget to say, and I'm not just trying to plug you guys, but seeing a family, the visual day to day and things happening, that is really, really good.
Yeah.
I do not see anything like that, to be honest, on YouTube, on a blog,
Mhm.
in a newspaper, nothing like that. And there are thousands of us, uh, ambassadors' kids, working for the government, missionaries. There
Yeah.
are international school students. There are thousands of us in the world, and there's nothing for it. So I encourage you, follow them, find more resources you can do and create. Let your voice be heard. It's unique. there are a lot of people that have these stories, a lot of famous people too that have navigated their industry, and you're like, oh gosh, how could they do that?
Mhm.
Because they grew up having to do it their whole lives. So yeah,
Exactly.
my last closing thoughts.
No, thank you so much for giving us your time, Rainier Lee, everybody. And thank you for everyone who kind of bobbed in and out of the conversation or have been here from start to finish. Thank you so much, Mr. Rainier. It's been a pleasure.
See you. Thanks for everything, Ian, and everybody have a nice day.
All right.